and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today, we're going to talk about Diane de Poitiers.
One day we will be remembered.
Usually, it's just me, but today I have my friend Kevin here.
Hello, everybody.
It's fun to have company when I talk about historical people. I'm not just in a closet talking to myself. Diane de Poitiers was born in the year of our Lord 1500. Her mother died when she was very young. I don't know exactly what age, but she was little when her mom died. As a young girl, she was in the service of Anne de Beaujeu, and she had been the older sister and regent to her brother the king. But now she was kind of older and running a finishing school for noble girls, and that's where Diane lived. Diane enjoyed horseback riding and swimming, and she was super athletic. Diane was educated in the popular curriculum of the time, Renaissance humanism, so that was all about making a person better, with like a lot of languages and etiquette and rhetoric, finance, law, architecture. They read a lot of like Greek history and old Latin books, but not for too long, because just after she turned 15, she was getting married. And she was marrying at 15 the 54-year-old Louis de Braze. He was the grandson of King Charles VII of France and his mistress, Agnes Sorel. So her husband, when she was a teenager, was a middle-aged man who was a grandson of a royal mistress. So it was kind of seen as normal to have a royal mistress. And Agnes Sorel has her own episode. So Louis was a courtier in the French king Francois I's court. Probably because of this, Diane got a pretty sweet gig. She was lady-in-waiting for Queen Claude. In 1518, Diane became a mother for the first time at the age of just 17. So she was 16 and pregnant. She had a little girl named Françoise. And I'm not just saying that wrong. It's not Francois with a silent S. Because she's female, there you say the S at the end. So her name was Françoise, the feminine form of Francois. Once she was a mother, her duties as lady-in-waiting would have changed. Because before she had kids, she wouldn't have been in attendance at any of the royal births, even though she worked for the queen, who was having so many babies. But they didn't want childless women assisting in childbirth very often because it was scary and sometimes people died, and they weren't trying to discourage teenagers from becoming pregnant. So you had to have a baby before you could be at the birth, usually, of a baby. So the year after she had her baby, she was probably in attendance at the birth of Queen Claude's next child, her fourth child, but the third to survive, Prince Henri. And this will become extremely relevant that 18-year-old Diane de Poitiers was probably assisting in the birth of Prince Henri. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time.
So I have a question. Who is the father of her baby?
Well, when she was 15, she married that 54-year-old Louis de Braze. He's the father.
Okay.
Her husband, who's almost 40 years older than her, 39 years older than her.
Way old.
Yeah, she didn't really get much of a say in who she was going to marry. And he was, like, working for the king. He had a good job. He was fairly powerful. He wasn't royal, but he was definitely in the circles.
Okay.
So Diane had her second baby 2 years later. Same father. She's still married to this 54-year-old who's now older. And Queen Claude had 7 babies in 8 years. So she was almost always pregnant. 7 babies in 8 years is real fast to have kids.
It's a lot.
Yeah. In February 1524, Diane's husband made some accusations against her father, and they turned out to be true. They weren't just rumors. Her father was hanging out with the wrong people. He had some bad friends, and those people were plotting to have part of France defect to the Holy Roman Empire. So it'd be sort of like if you found out the entire state of Maine and their government wanted to defect to Canada. But worse than that, because we haven't been at war with Canada for decades, and they had been. So it was pretty bad. Diane's father was convicted and sentenced to death. So that's unfortunate, because she already lost her mom when she was little, and now her dad is being sentenced to treason. The day before her father was supposed to be executed, Diane went to King Francois and pleaded for her father's life. Like, please don't kill him. He just had some bad friends. They were a bad influence. Please, please don't kill him. Word on the street was that Diane slept with King Francois to save her father's life. The same king that was her boss's husband and her husband's boss. And she was the wife of the guy who ratted her dad out to this king in the first place.
That's a really big sacrifice.
Yeah, but This rumor likely has more to do with his reputation than hers. He was extremely sexually active, and he slept with a lot of people, so they were probably just assumed. We don't know that it actually happened. But it did start to build a reputation as someone who may be willing to do something like that. People would be like, oh, Diane, we've heard about her. Like, there were rumors now.
Okay.
Can't have alone time with this king, or there will be rumors about you. The next day, Diane's father was led out to the execution block, and he laid his head down on it, and he just laid and laid and laid for an hour. He laid his head on the execution block and nothing happened. Then the king delivered his orders that his sentence was going to be commuted to life in prison. So he wasn't free to go. But
He just didn't die.
Yeah, after laying on the execution block for an hour, he was told, never mind, just life in prison instead, which feels extra mean. The king was like, deliver this in an hour. Just stand there for an hour and let him squirm. A few months later, Queen Claude then died, and we don't know exactly of what. Maybe after a miscarriage, or maybe just exhaustion from having so many babies so quickly. When Claude died, she had 7 children under the age of 8, which, that's a lot of pregnancy, so that easily could have just been what took her out. Prince Henri was just 6 years old when his mother died. At this point, Diane needed a new job because she had been working for the queen, who now died. She left the royal household and went to work for her former boss's mother-in-law, the Queen Mother, Louise of Savoy, so the king's mother. Diane was reportedly very pretty for the beauty standards of the time. Do you want to know what the beauty standards of the time were?
Yes.
It's likely that this is what Diane looked like, and it was considered extremely attractive. This was the goal, body standards. She had chestnut-colored hair and pale skin. That we know for sure. The additional beauty standards of the day that she probably fit with were big arms. They liked a thick arm. Big butt, so they liked a thick butt. And thick legs, so there was certain areas that they liked bigger than others. They also preferred small heads, small noses, and small boobs. So big arms, butt, and legs, but small boobs, nose, and head. Dark eyes, dark eyebrows, and dark eyelashes.
It's a good combination.
That was hashtag goals for the 16th century. Just 1 year later, King Francois was captured at war. He was captured by his royal nemesis, the Holy Roman Emperor. They were frenemies. Sometimes they were friendly with each other if it benefited them both, but mostly they hated each other. And his mother, the one who Diane worked for, Louise of Savoy, she worked very hard to get her son back. And Diane would have been there for the negotiation. She would have seen her new boss trying to get the king back from the Holy Roman Emperor. And a deal was made. A large ransom would be paid for the king. But as an assurance for his continuing good behavior, his 2 oldest sons, his heir and his spare, would be sent to Spain as good behavior hostages. Like, you better behave and the payments better come on time because I have both of your oldest sons. Prince Francois was 8 and Prince Henri was 7. So they were little. They were still 2nd and 3rd graders when they went to be hostages instead of their father.
That's so young.
That is so young. Yeah. And Diane was sent to escort the princes to their captivity because someone had to. They're little boys. And they would have known her. She was a lady-in-waiting to their lady mother until just the year before when their mother had died. And she was now lady-in-waiting to their lady grandmother. So she was like a friend of their mom. And she was sent to kind of escort them as their chaperone into their captivity. Just before the exchange, 7-year-old Prince Henri hugged Diane and kissed her on the cheek. The princes were exchanged for their father, and they didn't even get a chance to speak. There wasn't like a room where they were all in and they got a hug or anything. They passed each other as they were exchanged. The boys went into captivity, their father came out. 1 year later, the king did actually misbehave, and the princes were apparently treated poorly because of it. So they were princes in Spain, but they weren't treated well because their father was breaking all the rules that he had agreed to when he sent them in there, which I feel like is a jerk move. You're going to send your kids into captivity instead of you, and then you're not going to abide by the agreement, so they get treated bad.
And then they get punished for you misbehaving.
Yeah, because that was the deal. And that was just a year later, so at this point they're 8 and 9 years old. They're still little. Prince Henri spent his 4 years in captivity, because that's how long he was in captivity, thinking mostly about the beautiful Diane, the beautiful woman who had taken him to his captivity, who he had kissed on the cheek. He spent a lot of time thinking about her while he was in this miserable captivity. 4 years after they had been sent as hostages, they did finally return to France. But word on the street was that they didn't speak French anymore because remember they were 7 and 8 when they went over there, and they were reportedly told not to speak French. And now they're 11 and 12, and they've been speaking Spanish for the last 4 years. So even if that's exaggerated and they didn't forget how to speak French, it would have at least been stunted. They still spoke French like a 7 and 8-year-old because that was the last time they had spoken it. Their language hadn't been able to mature. And after they returned, in the next year, their grandmother, Louise of Savoy, passed away. But the king got remarried. Diane started to serve the new Queen of France, Eleanor of Austria. And she was the sister of the guy that had the princes in captivity, so the frenemies' sister. So this is all an awkward family situation. They're like, maybe we could be friends again. Look, I'll give you back your kids. You marry my sister. Maybe we can get along. But that's got to be sort of awkward. That same year, Diane's husband died. After his death, Diane wore black and white for the rest of her life, because white was the color of mourning in France, and black was an appropriate color for widows to wear. Also, she was named after Diana, goddess of the moon, and she felt like white and black for the moon goddess lady was just good branding. She was like, this is what a moon goddess would wear, black and white. Sometime after Diane was widowed, but before Prince Henri was married, Diane and Prince Henri started a relationship. And I'm not really comfortable calling it a relationship because Diane was in her early 30s, and Prince Henri would have been in his early teens, maybe as young as 12. So yikes. At some point, just after his return from Spain, he jousted in a duel when he was like 11, 12, maybe 13. And he wore Diane's colors. He wore her favors, and that's like in high school when you wear your boyfriend's Letterman jacket. It's like, we're together. That's why you would do that. And that's why people aren't sure when it started, but when he was 12 or 13, that's what he was doing. It seems like Henri, for his part, feels like he consented, but he was so young and just a year or two out of that traumatic experience of growing up as a hostage. So one could argue that he maybe needed some therapy, but that wasn't a thing then. In 1533, Prince Henri was getting married at the age of 14. By this point, he was definitely in love with Diane de Poitiers. Henri married Catherine de Medici, who was his same age. They were both 14. It wasn't either of their choices. They were just told who they were marrying and when and where to be. But they were the same age, so that's some kind of, like Diane was with that 54-year-old when she was 15. Diane approved of the choice for bride because Diane was the second cousin of her boyfriend's new wife, Catherine. So the new bride was a distant relation. And also, the king didn't seem that interested in Catherine. He was in love with Diane. So he stayed in love with Diane and didn't visit Catherine sexually very often. So Catherine didn't get pregnant because her husband just wasn't that interested. 3 years into their marriage, the couple was still childless, and things were still going strong with the now 17-year-old Henry and the 36-year-old Diane. They're definitely together at this point. He's a junior in high school and she's 36, which back then 36 is older than it is now. At this time, Henry played a game of tennis with his older brother and former dungeon mate, the same one he was in captivity with. After the match, his brother Francois asked for water, drank water, and then collapsed. And he died less than a fortnight later. It was like 10 or 11 days later he died.
Wow.
So some people suspected poison, but who did it? They didn't know. So they had to, and it might not have even been poison. He might just have been sick. But they suspected poison, and Henry and Catherine were looking sus because they had the most to gain. Without Francois, Henri was the new heir. He would be the next king of France, and Catherine would be the next queen. But it didn't really seem like Henri was prepared to be king. He was still pretty young. He was only 17. And he decided that he needed to go on war campaign to prove himself, like crash course in kinging. I may be 17, but I could probably do this. When he returned a year later, he had a baby with him because he had had a brief affair with an Italian girl, and that resulted in pregnancy. So he showed up back from war with a baby and this mistress. But it wasn't his official mistress. He had named his new illegitimate daughter after his other mistress, his main mistress, Diane. And that had to be pretty sucky times for Catherine because she's not getting pregnant. Her husband leaves for war for like a year and comes back with a baby. of another Italian girl, named after his mistress. I'd be so annoyed. Catherine wasn't happy about this, obviously, but she kept her opinions to herself. Diane took it very well. She agreed to help with the raising of baby Diane. So Diane was raising the illegitimate baby Diane, and it was sort of like their child together. Even though it wasn't Diane's baby, she was raising it. Diane was keeping the king so busy that the queen was still not pregnant almost a decade into their marriage. Diane was attempting to support the marriage. She encouraged them to have sex, and she was like, you need to go impregnate your wife. Like, you can't not have heirs. You're the next king. So she would be like, tick-tock, go get her pregnant. And at one point, Catherine had a peephole made into her husband's quarters so that she could watch what he did with Diane and hopefully learn what her husband liked so that she could do that. She could be more like Diane. Unfortunately, while she watched them in the act, her eyes were so full of tears that she didn't really absorb much information. It kind of broke her heart. She was like, oh, he's like really in love with Diane. It's different than he is with me. The queen tried everything, all the fertility treatments of the day, including putting horse dung on her hoo-ha and drinking mule's urine. Ugh. All in an attempt to get pregnant. And it didn't work, maybe because her hoo-ha smelled like dung and her breath smelled like mule's urine. That probably didn't help.
I wouldn't find that attractive.
Yeah, I'm thinking her husband didn't either. She was trying, but that's what she was trying. While she was doing that, Diane was working on extending her youthful appearance. She consumed liquid gold. It was her beauty potion. Diane would drink it every single day. It was the latest fad. Its origin dates back to ancient Egyptians and the ancient Chinese, but by the 16th century it had made its way to Western Europe, and now Diane was slowly getting gold poisoning. Now, you might be wondering why she's getting poisoned, because we can eat gold now. There's in drinks, it's on food. We do eat gold, and we are not slowly being gold poisoned. The gold is different now. Now you can eat 24 karat gold. You can eat gold that is prepared to be eaten. But that's not how it was back then. They prepared this liquid gold with a lot of extra poison. So she was dying, but she thought she was keeping her looks youthful. She suffered from muscle and joint pain, splitting headaches, and extreme fatigue. It also, this potion included mercury and copper. So it was like poison on top of poison on top of poison. But anything for youth as far as Diane was concerned. Her boyfriend was nearly 20 years younger than her, which is closer than her husband. Her husband had been nearly 40 years older than her. So she's never really been with someone her age. But she was trying to stay young like her boyfriend. The royal couple was then checked for any abnormal medical issues that could be, it's been 10 years. They're not pregnant. They're like, maybe this is a medical issue. Maybe there's something wrong. And so they were both checked by the court doctors. The court doctors found out that, yes, the royal couple did have medical issues. But by royal couple, they meant him. And by medical issues, they meant his penis pointed downward. And maybe because it was bent like that, like a gonzo nose, he might have had an oddly placed seminal opening that was causing some issues, getting his ingredients to her ingredients. So the medical advice was that they needed to, I'm so sorry for lack of a better term, they needed to do it doggy style to have a baby. It was in the official records. It was prescribed.
Oh, Christina.
In the official records, the king had a dick that pointed downward, and doggy style was the way to get a baby. And I feel like that means we know how he was doing it with that other Italian girl while he was at work, because he wasn't like, well, no, I did it this way with this girl and we have a baby. He was just like, yep, that tracks. Doggy style it is. So that's what it was from then on. That was how they decided they were going to have a baby. Reportedly, what would happen, because the king would have a hard time getting in the mood with his wife, the queen. Diane would bring Henry almost to completion, and then he would run to Catherine's room and finish. And then he would return to his room where Diane was waiting for round 2. So that's a choice. There's not even time for a shower in between. He's just like, he's in Diane and then he's in his wife. Diane ate about 6 small meals a day, mostly broth-based. So it's sort of a Gwyneth Paltrow vibe. She had a lot of broth-based food. She would also make her own beauty face masks out of melon juice, ground barley, and egg mixed with ambergris. Now I know what you're thinking. What is ambergris? Because I didn't know either. I had to Google it. Ambergris is sperm whale vomit. Vomit that comes out of their rectum. So I don't know what makes it vomit, but sperm whale vomit that comes out of its rectum. And I hear it's waxy. So
It's
anything for
disgusting.
beauty. Yeah. Anything for beauty, though, even if it's sperm whale vomit poop on your face and drinking poison gold. After about a decade of marriage, Catherine was finally pregnant, and she had her first baby in 1544. And this didn't bother Diane at all, because she was like, finally, like, I've been trying to get you guys to have this baby forever. Finally, it's about time. Diane was in no way threatened by Princess Catherine. Henri stepped out on his wife more than with just Diane, but Diane remained his favorite through his whole life. She was his main mistress. He slept with a lot of people, but Diane was his main. She was the love of his life. In addition to being Henri's mistress, Diane also got into a feud with her boyfriend's father's mistress, Anne, who was the current official mistress of the king because his dad's still the king. Anne was 8 years younger than Diane, even though Anne was sleeping with the father and Diane was sleeping with the son. And Anne made it super clear. She talked all the time about how old and decrepit Diane was and just like, oh, that old lady. Which, I mean, maybe she would have seemed like that compared to her boyfriend, who was very young. But they got in a huge fight. And Diane was reportedly older, but very pretty and youthful looking. So it was probably just jealousy or cattiness or something. Probably all that gold and sperm whale rectum vomit that she used helped. Anne also spread the rumor that Diane was a witch. And those were fighting words. That accusation could get you straight up killed. You can't just be calling people a witch. They could be burned at the stake for that. Prince Henri came to Diane's defense, confronting his father's mistress. And Anne wisely stepped back. She's like, I don't want to get in a fight with the crown prince. That's probably not a good look. And Diane really appreciated how her young boyfriend had stood up for her in that situation. She wasn't used to anyone standing up for her. A couple of years later, Henri's father died. And Henri banished his father's mistress because he's the king now. So his father's mistress is out, and his mistress' rival is gone. He took all her land and basically just left her destitute. Maybe Diane should have thought about what it would be like for a royal mistress to lose the king, because she was the new royal mistress. But she likely wasn't expecting to outlive her king, as she was almost 20 years older than him. So she's probably like, well, this won't be a problem I have. I'll likely die before he does. So the king is dead, long live the king. And the new king was Diane's boyfriend, 28-year-old King Henri II. Diane spent a lot of time taking cold plunges in water. She really liked the polar bear plunge vibe. That was another thing that she was doing to keep herself young. And then she would go into a deep sleep afterward, probably because she was having to recover from hypothermia 3 to 4 times a day. This is how often she took these cold plunges. Cold plunge, sleep. Cold plunge, sleep. This was keeping her young. She was putting herself in like cryogenic freeze state. By this point, Diane was fairly powerful. She was nearly 50 at this point. And when the Pope came to present the Golden Rose to the Queen, which is like an award for being a good Catholic, he also presented Diane with a pearl necklace, because, like, if you're going to give the Queen an award, you have to at least give a present to the King's favorite mistress. Diane was also made a duchess in her own right twice. They gave her 2 duchies to run just as hers, because she was sleeping with the king. King Henri trusted Diane above everyone else at court. Oftentimes, official documents were signed, one word, Henry Diane. He just started signing his official court documents, Henry Diane, who's, again, not his wife, Catherine is, but he was in love with Diane. Until 1551, Diane was also in charge of the royal children's education, and she raised the king's illegitimate daughter, Diane, as if she was her own. So she had a lot of power over all the royal children, over the king. She was, in everything except name, the Queen of France. Diane had a lot of power, but only as long as the king lived. Like, she saw what happened to the last mistress. Once the king died, she was out and destitute. In 1559, at the age of 40, Henri participated in a joust, celebrating his daughter's marriage. In my opinion, not a marriage worth celebrating, but that's another story for another time. His 13-year-old daughter was marrying a 35-year-old king of Spain, is a whole thing. But he was like, hey, I had a mistress at 13, and she was in her 30s, so he probably thought that was totally normal. Catherine begged him not to participate. But Diane was like, yeah, you should definitely participate in this joust, because you are a cool guy, and that's what cool guys do. And the king was all nostalgic about his joust days and his war days. Like, he was 40 now. He was getting older, and he was like, yeah, I could still do this. I'm still young. There was an accident, and 40-year-old King Henri ended up with a bunch of lance splinters right in his face. Large splint, like, calling it a splinter is minimizing it just a bit. These are huge shards of wood poking out of his face. 5 splinters were removed from his face, but 1 was left in. It was a very large splinter, and it was right in his eye. And the royal doctors were worried that if they removed it, they would do more damage than if they left it in. For a couple of days, the king seemed to recover. He was doing a little better. He was dictating letters for other people to write, and he was talking with his wife, who was at his bedside. Diane was not allowed at his bedside during this time. The queen forbade her from coming by. She's like, he needs to rest, and you are not a calming influence. And also, you were the one who encouraged him to do this joust in the first place, so stay away. And she was pretty scared of the queen, because if the king died, the queen could have her banished, and they weren't super friendly. Unfortunately for the king, his eye splinter had pierced his eye so deep that it was also in his brain. And they hadn't removed it, so an infection was developing. And the infection spread all throughout the king's brain, and he died. So this tournament killed him. Diane had outlived her boyfriend. She was nearly 60 at this point, because he was 40. And she was completely dependent on her late boyfriend's wife. This wasn't going to go well. Diane lived out the rest of her life away from court, in a chateau, in comfortable obscurity, a virtual exile. So she was technically still in France, but nobody saw her around. She was comfortable. She wasn't starving. She was in a chateau, which is a really nice house. Like a castle, basically, a palace. At 64, she had a horseback riding accident, and she never fully recovered from this accident, probably because of all that liquid gold. She had brittle bones, and so she never recovered from this horse riding accident, and she died a year later. Her body was recovered later and tested in the 2000s, and she had 250 times the normal amount of gold in her system at the time of her death. So she was definitely down in that gold still at the end of her life, because her corpse shows signs of it.
That's a lot of gold to look beautiful.
That's a lot of gold. But it reportedly worked. She reportedly looked young until she died, but maybe it was just all the things. I don't know. I mean, she had that sperm whale vomit. She had a lot of things she was working on. Maybe one of them worked. But she reportedly looked good when she died. Even though she was 64, she looked much younger. And that is where I'll leave it for now. What did you think of Diane de Poitiers?
Very interesting life for a very interesting woman.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be really hard life to live.
Start at the bottom and essentially work your way to the top.
Yeah, but then she should not have encouraged him to participate in that joust. Because that was what killed him, and that's when she
lost
no
everything.
longer had her power. But
it makes you wonder their social and their society versus today.
Yeah, I mean, it was totally normal to have a royal mistress. You were almost expected to have a royal mistress. So
and that was
it was normal
accepted behavior
for the king.
Yeah.
And the queen could never. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, of course.
You will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.